Here's one even hardcore Kiss fans get wrong. For years, All-American Man, Rockin' in the USA, and Larger Than Life on Alive 2 were credited to Ace Frehley. They weren't his. By 1977, Frehley reportedly wasn't in a state to deliver under deadline, so the band quietly called Bob Kulick, the same guitarist who'd lost the original Kiss audition to Frehley back in 1973. Kulick knocked out the parts in a couple of days, while Ace, by his own account, was in another room entirely. The 1997 remasters finally confirmed what fans had whispered about for 2 decades. Kulick stayed Kiss's go-to-ghost player for years afterward on Killers and beyond, all while the band publicly maintained the illusion that Frehley never missed a beat. It's a strange kind of career, being indispensable and invisible at the same time. Does Kulick deserve a bigger place in Kiss history? Or is uncredited studio work just the job he signed up for? If you've ever heard the slow burning guitar intro that opens Lou Reed's live version of Sweet Jane, you've heard Steve Hunter, even if you only assumed it was Reed himself. Hunter wrote and played that entire extended intro for 1974's Rock and Roll Animal, turning a relatively modest studio track into one of the most theatrical life rock recordings ever committed to tape. Reed, by most accounts, was thrilled to let it happen. He wasn't exactly known for flashy lead playing, and the album's success depended on a guitar hero he didn't have to be. Hunter and his frequent partner Dick Wagner became an uncredited secret weapon for hire across the 70s. The guy's labels called when a record needed teeth, it couldn't generate on its own. Most casual fans still assume that intro is just the song. It isn't. It's Steve Hunter's composition, bolted onto someone else's hit. Does that make Rock and Roll Animal more Hunter's album than Reed's? Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare sounds exactly like its title. Theatrical, menacing, dripping with, I think, guitar drama, and a huge part of that sound belongs to Dick Wagner, who co-wrote material and played guitar across the 1975 album, credited almost entirely to Cooper's persona. Wagner wasn't a band member. He was a hired studio gun brought in specifically because the project needed guitar work sturdy enough to support an entire theatrical concept album. He'd go on to do the same uncredited trick for Kiss, supplying the solo on Destroyer's Sweet Pain while Ace Frehley was unavailable, a contribution Kiss didn't officially restore until the 2012 reissue. Wagner spent decades as exactly this kind of fixer, never the face on the cover, always the reason the guitar parts actually worked. Cooper has since credited him generously in interviews, which is more than plenty of stars ever bother with. Is that kind of late, generous acknowledgement enough? Or does the original silence still matter?
Right, brilliant, mate. Nothing like it.
Steely Dan's Reelin in the Years has one of the most famous guitar solos in rock history, and Jimmy Page has reportedly called it his all-time favorite, which makes it worth knowing the guy who played it wasn't in Steely Dan at all. Elliott Randall was a jobbing session musician, fresh out of the Broadway pit for Jesus Christ Superstar, when Donald Fagen and Walter Becker called him in 1972, struggling to find the right flavor for the track. Randall plugged into whatever amp was lying around the studio, ran through it once as a warm-up that nobody recorded, then nailed the entire intro, answers, and solo in one continuous take on the second try. Nobody asked for another. That single take became Guitar World's 40th greatest solo of all time, permanently stitched into a song most fans assume was played by an actual band member. Should the most celebrated solo on the record carry the name of the guy who actually improvised it? Steely Dan basically built an entire production philosophy around hiring the best possible guitarist for each individual song. And nowhere does that pay off harder than Kid Charlemagne, where session legend Larry Carlton delivers a solo so technically dense that St. Vincent has called it sacrosanct, meaning don't you dare improvise over it. Carlton wasn't a Steely Dan member either. He was simply the most reliable session player in LA, brought in because Fagen and Becker were notorious perfectionists who'd burn through guitarists until something clicked. Mark Knopfler has talked about grinding through a 10-hour Steely Dan session that produced mere seconds of usable music. That's the standard Carlton was matching. Take after take, on command. Casual listeners hear Kid Charlemagne and assume it's just the band being great. It's actually one hired gun. It's being surgically precise under enormous pressure. Does it change how you hear the song, knowing the most famous guitar moment was outsourced entirely? Everybody remembers Stevie Ray Vaughan's blistering solos on David Bowie's Let's Dance, and rightly so, but the sound that actually defines the album, that tight, funky, instantly recognizable rhythm guitar driving the title track, belongs to Nile Rodgers. Bowie hired him specifically because Rodgers, fresh off Building Chic's entire disco sound, knew exactly how to make a rhythm part the hook itself, rather than the backdrop 2-1. Rodgers has said Bowie gave him almost total production freedom, trusting him to reinvent his sound from scratch, rather than chase the Bowie of Ziggy Stardust. The result became Bowie's best-selling album ever, anchored by a guitar part most fans associate with the 80s in general rather than with Rodgers specifically. Vaughan gets the guitar hero spotlight in every retrospective. Rodgers built the floor he was soloing on top of. Which contribution actually carries Let's Dance further? The flashy solos, or the rhythm part nobody can stop dancing to? If you've ever loved a 70s Laurel Canyon record, there's a real chance Danny Cooch Kortchmar is quietly responsible for why it sounds the way it does. He played guitar on Carole King's Tapestry and James Taylor's early albums, then became Don Henley's secret weapon during his solo run, co-writing and playing on hits like Dirty Laundry and The Boys of Summer. Kortchmar was never a band member chasing his own spotlight. He was the guy artists called when a song needed a specific groove or hook and didn't have one yet. Henley has credited him as essential to shaping that entire solo sound, crediting Cooch by name in liner notes more generously than most artists bother with. Still, ask the average classic rock fan who Danny Kortchmar is, and you'll mostly get blank stares despite decades of hits running through his hands. Is being the most important name nobody recognizes its own strange kind of success, or just a quieter injustice? When Peter Frampton left Humble Pie in 1971 to launch his solo career, the obvious assumption was the band would lose its guitar identity along with him. Instead, they brought in Clem Clempson from Coliseum, and he immediately delivered the searing lead work on 30 Days in the Hole and the rest of 1972's Smokin', arguably the heaviest, most muscular album of the band's career. Clempson wasn't trying to replicate Frampton's melodic, radio-friendly style. He leaned harder into blues rock grit, and the album sold better than anything Humble Pie had released with the name Guitarists still in the lineup. Most casual rock fans, who know 30 Days in the Hole from classic rock radio, still assume it's Frampton on that solo. It isn't, and arguably it's better for it. Replacing a beloved guitarist usually shrinks a band's sound. Clempson is the rare case where the replacement may have actually sharpened it. Does that count as saving the band or simply changing it for the better? Warren Zevon's Werewolves of London has one of the most instantly hummable guitar riffs of the 70s, and it came from Waddy Wachtel, a session player so embedded in the LA rock machine that he's nearly invisible despite playing on records by Stevie Nicks, Linda Ronstadt, and half the Laurel Canyon scene combined. Wachtel co-wrote the riff during a loose studio jam, a moment that never shows up on a songwriting credit the way it probably should. He later became Stevie Nicks' longtime guitarist and musical director, the steady hand behind decades of her solo career that fans rarely credit by name. Wachtel has joked for years that being a top session player means being essential and anonymous in the same breath. Everyone's heard, almost nobody could pick him out of a lineup. Werewolves of London remains a defining 70s single built on a riff most listeners assume came from Zevon himself. Should the riff's authors share more of that song's legacy? Every kid who ever air guitared to Beat It pictures Eddie Van Halen, and fair enough. That's his solo, recorded as a favor in 20 minutes flat. But the guitarist actually holding Thriller together, track after track, is Steve Lukather. As a Toto session veteran already worked half to death across LA studios, Lukather played rhythm guitar on Beat It itself, plus key parts on Human Nature and Elsewhere on the best-selling album of all time. Producer Quincy Jones leaned on session aces precisely because pop perfection on this scale doesn't tolerate guesswork. Every part had to lock in immediately. Lukather got a liner note credit, technically, but try finding a casual fan who could name him versus Van Halen. That imbalance still bugs some musicians today, who argue the unglamorous rhythm work is what actually makes Beat It groove. Should the guy who built the foundation get anywhere near the same recognition as the guy who soloed over it? And that's it. 10 guitarists who quietly shaped some of rock's most iconic recordings, while their names stayed buried in liner notes nobody reads. None of this is about tearing down the artists whose names were on the covers. Most of these collaborations happen with everyone's blessing. But it does change how you hear these albums. Like, subscribe and tell me what you think in the comments. Cheers.
Kick away the up.